The clippers buzzed like angry wasps in the nurse's office as 12-year-old Ariel Daniels's braids fell to the floor, revealing the alopecia she'd carefully hidden beneath. Ms. Rourke stood watching, satisfaction in her eyes as she forced the school nurse to continue shaving until nothing remained. The teacher had found her perfect target, a quiet artist whose military mother was deployed overseas and whose medical condition made her vulnerable. A single video, secretly captured by Ariel's friend Maya, traveled across oceans to Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels's phone. What the school didn't realize as they issued their one-day suspension and dismissive statement: they hadn't just humiliated a child, they had declared war on a woman who had commanded battalions. And when Naomi Daniels walked through those schools, doors 3 days later in full military uniform, the hallway fell silent. Everyone instantly understanding that this wasn't just about hair, this was about justice. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Sunlight filtered through the classroom blinds, casting warm stripes across Ariel Daniels' desk. The 12-year-old sat hunched over her journal, her pencil moving in delicate strokes as she sketched a bird taking flight. Her braided extensions fell forward, partially hiding her face, exactly how she liked it. The beautiful braids weren't just a style choice. They carefully concealed the patches where her hair refused to grow due to alopecia, a condition she'd been dealing with since she was 9. "Ariel Daniels," Ms. Rourke's sharp voice cut through the classroom. "What do you think you're doing?" Ariel's hand froze mid-stroke. "Just finishing my notes, Ms. Rourke," she said quietly, not looking up. Ms. Rourke strode down the aisle, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. She towered over Ariel's desk, arms crossed tightly over her chest. At 47, Evelyn Rourke had taught 7th grade for over 20 years, and she prided herself on maintaining discipline. "That doesn't look like algebra to me," she said, snatching the journal from Ariel's desk. The class fell silent as she flipped through the pages of intricate sketches. "This is why your grades are slipping. Too busy being an artist to pay attention." Ariel's grades weren't slipping. She was top of her class in almost every subject, but she didn't correct her teacher. Instead, she stared at her desk, waiting for the moment to pass. "And these braids," Ms. Rourke continued, eyeing Ariel's hair with visible disdain. "So elaborate, so showy. Don't you think it's a bit much for school, Ariel?" A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maya Thompson, Ariel's best friend since kindergarten, shot her a sympathetic look from across the room. The bus morning announcements crackled over the PA system, saving Ariel from having to respond. Principal Wexley's monotone voice filled the room. "Attention students and faculty. This is a reminder that our strict dress code will be enforced starting today. All students must comply with the appearance standards outlined in the handbook. Thank you for your cooperation." Ms. Rourke's thin lips curved into a smile. "Well, isn't that timely?" She tossed Ariel's journal back onto her desk. "Stand up, Ms. Daniels." Ariel slowly rose from her seat, her heart pounding. 24. Pairs of eyes turned to watch. "Front of the class, please," Ms. Rourke instructed, pointing to the whiteboard. Ariel walked to the front, her steps heavy. She kept her gaze on the floor. "Class, this is a perfect example of a dress code violation," Ms. Rourke announced, circling Ariel like a predator. "These braids are excessive and distracting. The handbook clearly states that hair must be neat and conservative." "Ms. Rourke," Ariel whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have a medical—" "Speak up," Ms. Rourke interrupted. "If you have something to say, the whole class should hear it." Ariel swallowed hard. "I have a medical condition," she said, slightly louder. "My mom got permission from the school for my hair." Ms. Rourke's expression hardened. "A medical condition that requires fancy braids? That's a new one." She turned to address the class. "See how students will say anything to get around the rules?" No one laughed. The silence was deafening. "You, either take those extensions out right now or you'll be sent home," Ms. Rourke declared. "Your choice." Ariel's eyes welled with tears. "Please, I can't. My mom—" "Your mother isn't here," Ms. Rourke cut in, "and I doubt she'd approve of you lying to a teacher." She grabbed Ariel by the arm. Let's go. We'll sort this out in the nurse's office. As Ms. Rourke pulled Ariel toward the door, Maya quickly slipped her phone from her pocket and pressed record, capturing the teacher's tight grip on Ariel's arm and the fear on her friend's face. The hallway stretched endlessly as Ms. Rourke marched Ariel toward the nurse's office, her fingers digging into the girl's upper arm. Students in other classrooms glanced up as they passed, curious eyes following the unfolding scene. "Ms. Adams," Ms. Rourke called as they entered the nurse's office. "This student is in violation of the dress code. She claims she has some sort of medical condition, but I have my doubts." Nurse Adams looked up from her computer, her brow furrowing as she took in Ariel's tear-streaked face. "What seems to be the problem?" "Her hair," Ms. Rourke stated flatly. "It's against regulations." "I have alopecia," Ariel managed to say. "My mom filed paperwork. Please check." Nurse Adams moved to her filing cabinet. "Let me see." "Don't bother." Ms. Rourke interrupted. "I already checked her file this morning. There's a general medical form, but nothing specific about hair exemptions." This was a lie, but Ariel was too overwhelmed to challenge it. "But my mom talked to Principal Wexley," Ariel insisted. "Please call her." "Your mother's deployed overseas, isn't she?" Ms. Rourke's tone was suddenly sympathetic, though her eyes remained cold. "Look, I understand this is difficult, but rules are rules. We need to remove these extensions for cleanliness and equality." Nurse Adams hesitated. "Shouldn't we call her father first?" "I have parental permission on file," Ms. Rourke lied again, her voice confident. "This is a school policy matter. We're authorized to enforce the dress code." Still uncertain, Nurse Adams glanced between Ms. Rourke and Ariel. "I suppose if there's permission, there is," Ms. Rourke assured her. "Now, do you have clippers? These extensions need to come out." Ariel's blood ran cold. "No, please," she begged. "My hair, you don't understand." But Ms. Rourke was already guiding her into the exam chair. Nurse Adams reluctantly brought out a set of clippers from a cabinet, still looking unsure. "This is for your own good, Ariel," Ms. Rourke said, switching on the clippers. The mechanical buzz filled the small office. "Everyone follows the same rules here." With a swift motion, Ms. Rourke began removing Ariel's braided extensions, revealing the patchy, sparse hair beneath. Tears streamed down Ariel's face as she watched pieces of her carefully crafted camouflage fall to the floor. "See? That wasn't so bad," Ms. Rourke said, her voice falsely cheerful. But she didn't stop. With the extensions, the clippers continued to move across Ariel's scalp, taking what little natural hair remained. "That's enough," Nurse Adams finally intervened. But the damage was done. Ariel sat in the chair, nearly bald, looking like a stranger to herself, in the small mirror on the wall. "There," Ms. Rourke said, switching off the clippers. "Now you're in compliance." Ariel couldn't speak. Her body shook with silent sobs as her hands reached up to feel her exposed scalp. The cold air of the nurse's office stung against her skin. "I'll give you a few minutes to collect yourself," Ms. Rourke said, placing the clippers back on the counter. "Then you can return to class." She exited the office, leaving Ariel alone with Nurse Adams. "I'm so sorry," the nurse whispered, clearly distressed. I didn't realize she would." She stopped, unable to find the right words. "Let me call your father." But Ariel couldn't respond. She curled into herself, her entire world shattered. "I want my mom," she finally whispered. "I'll call your dad right away," Nurse Adams promised, reaching for the phone. "Just wait here." She stepped out of the office, leaving Ariel alone with her reflection. Minutes later, the door cracked open. Maya peeked in, her eyes widening at the sight of her friend. Without a word, she rushed to Ariel's side, pulling off her hoodie and gently placing it over Ariel's head. "I saw what happened," Maya said, her voice trembling with anger. "I recorded some of it. My sister's going to help us. That witch can't get away with this." Ariel said nothing. She pulled the hoodie tight around her face and stared blankly ahead. That evening, as the video began circulating online, the school issued a brief statement. We are aware of a disciplinary misunderstanding that occurred today. The teacher involved has been suspended for 1 day while we investigate the matter. The privacy of all parties will be respected during this process. No mention of the shaving. No mention of Ariel's medical condition. No mention of the humiliation a 12-year-old girl had endured at the hands of someone meant to protect her. Eric Daniels paced the living room floor, his cell phone pressed tightly against his ear. The former Army sergeant had been trying to reach his wife for hours, leaving increasingly urgent messages. "Naomi, call me as soon as you get this," he said, his voice strained. "It's about Ariel. Something happened at school. It's bad." He ended the call and ran a hand over his face, exhaustion etched in every line. Colonel Naomi Daniels was 3 weeks into a classified operation overseas. Communication was limited at best, and Eric had no way of knowing when she'd receive his messages. Right now, he was on his own. Upstairs, Ariel hadn't spoken a word since he'd picked her up from school. She'd simply handed him the hoodie Maya had given her and walked silently to the car. Her exposed scalp a shocking sight that had unleashed a flood of emotions Eric struggled to contain. Anger, confusion, heartbreak, and a burning desire to march back into that school and demand answers. But Ariel needed him more. So he'd driven home, helping her inside when her legs seemed too weak to carry her. Now she sat motionless on her bed, staring at the wall, the hoodie pulled back over her head. Meanwhile, across town, Principal Thomas Wexley had called an emergency meeting in his office. The blinds were drawn, and his secretary had strict instructions not to interrupt. "This is a nightmare," Wexley muttered, loosening his tie. At 58, he'd hoped to coast through his final years before retirement without incident. "What the hell were you thinking, Evelyn?" Ms. Rourke sat stiffly in one of the visitor chairs, her posture defensive. "I was enforcing the dress code as instructed." The girl was being defiant. The third person in the room, Harold Brennan, the school district's attorney, cleared his throat. "Let's focus on damage control. The video doesn't show the actual haircut. We can frame this as a miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" Wexley's voice rose. "She shaved a student's head." "Partial video evidence," Brennan countered coolly. "Her word against the students, and we have the new dress code policy to back us up." Ms. Rourke nodded. "The girl claimed to have some medical condition, but there was nothing specific in her file about hair exemptions." "Was there anything about alopecia?" Wexley asked, remembering a conversation from months ago. "Not that I saw," Ms. Rourke answered. "Too quickly." Brennan tapped his pen against his legal pad. "Here's our approach. We acknowledge a disciplinary incident occurred. We say proper procedures weren't followed, hence the 1-day suspension, but we don't admit to any specific actions. We cite student privacy laws to avoid details." "And if the parents push?" Wexley asked. "We suggest private mediation," Brennan replied. "Keep it out of the courts. Offer counseling for the student, maybe a transfer to another classroom." Wexley nodded slowly. "Fine. Draft the statement. I want this contained by tomorrow morning." As the adults plotted, Ariel sat in her darkening bedroom. Her sketchpad lay open beside her, but the pencil remained untouched. The characters she'd created, brave, colorful heroes who overcame obstacles, seemed childish now. Meaningless. She ran her hand over her scalp again, feeling the uneven patches where Ms. Rourke had been particularly rough with the clippers. The physical sensation was strange, but it was nothing compared to the hollowness inside her. In her mind, she kept replaying the moment when the first braid fell to the floor, the sudden exposure, the laughter in Ms. Rourke's eyes, the helplessness. Eric knocked gently on her door. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart," he called softly. Ariel didn't respond. She hadn't spoken since climbing into his car that afternoon. "Ariel," he pushed the door open slightly. "You need to eat something." She turned away from him, pulling the covers over her head. Eric sighed, his heart breaking for his daughter. "I'll leave it here," he said, placing a plate on her desk. "Try to have a few bites, okay?" When she didn't respond, he added, "I love you, Ari. We're going to fix this." "But how do you fix something like this?" he wondered as he closed her door. In another part of town, Maya Thompson sat at her sister Jasmine's kitchen table, watching her upload the video clip. "Are you sure we should do this?" Maya asked nervously. "Ariel is so private, she might not want everyone to see." Jasmine, a college sophomore and budding activist, looked up from her laptop. "This isn't just about Ariel, Maya. This is about every black girl who's been policed for her appearance. This is about power and who gets to exercise it. But Ariel will thank you someday," Jasmine assured her. "Sometimes the only way to fight injustice is to expose it." She hit the upload button. Done. Now we wait. By morning, the short clip had been viewed over 10,000 times. Comments flooded in, most expressing outrage, some questioning what happened before the recording started, others demanding to see the full story. Maya texted Ariel repeatedly, but received no response. Jason Reed, the school's art teacher and Ariel's favorite instructor, caught wind of the incident during his morning prep period. Known for his colorful bow ties and genuine connection with students, Mr. Reed immediately went to Principal Wexley's office. "Is it true?" he demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Did Evelyn really shave Ariel Daniels' head?" Wexley's face remained impassive. "Jason, you know I can't discuss disciplinary matters involving other staff." "This isn't about staff," Mr. Reed pressed. "This is about a 12-year-old girl with a medical condition who was humiliated in our school, a school that's supposed to protect her." "We're handling it," Wexley said dismissively. "Handling it?" Mr. Reed's voice rose. "By suspending Rourke for one day? That's not handling it, Thomas. That's sweeping it under the rug." Wexley's expression hardened. "Be careful, Jason. Your contract renewal is coming up. I'd hate to see your passion interfere with your professional judgment." "Are you threatening me?" Mr. Reed asked incredulously. "I'm reminding you of your place," Wexley replied coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a district call in 5 minutes." That afternoon, Eric found an unmarked envelope that had been slipped under his front door. Inside was a handwritten note. "Check the nurses' files. They know what happened." His hands shook as he read the message again. Someone on the inside was reaching out. Someone who knew the truth. That night, Ariel finally fell into an exhausted sleep after hours of silent tears. But her rest wasn't peaceful. In her dreams, she stood on the school's stage during assembly. One by one, her braids began falling, drifting to the floor like autumn leaves. The entire student body pointed and laughed, their faces distorting into grotesque masks of cruelty. In the dream, she tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the stage. Ms. Rourke appeared with oversized clippers, smiling as she approached. Ariel woke with a scream, her body drenched in sweat. Eric rushed into her room, gathering her into his arms as she sobbed against his chest, the first sound she'd made in nearly 24 hours. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, rocking her gently. "Daddy's here. You're safe." But they both knew it wasn't true. How could she be safe when she'd have to face those same hallways again? Those same stairs? The next morning, Eric called the school district board, demanding an emergency meeting. The secretary put him on hold for 17 minutes before returning with a response. "The board will review the incident at their next scheduled meeting. In 3 weeks, she informed him, her voice professionally detached. 3 weeks? Eric's grip tightened on the phone. "My daughter was assaulted yesterday. Sir, we understand your frustration, but proper protocols must be followed. The incident report has been filed, and the teacher has been disciplined. If you'd like to file a formal grievance, I can email you the form." Eric hung up, fuming. They were stalling, hoping the outrage would die down, hoping he would give up. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Online, the video continued to gain traction. Local news outlets picked up the story, though their coverage was frustratingly vague. Incident at local middle school sparks controversy. Comment sections filled with conflicting opinions. That poor girl. That teacher should be fired immediately. "We don't know the whole story. Maybe the kid was being disruptive." "Why are people making this about race? It's about following school rules. Black girls' bodies are always policed. This is just another example." The discourse raged. But for the Daniels family, this wasn't some abstract debate. This was their life, shattered in a single afternoon by a teacher's cruelty. Far away at a military outpost, Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels finally received Eric's encrypted video message. Her stoic composure, the same that had earned her respect among her subordinates, cracked as she watched the short clip of her daughter being marched down the hallway, fear etched across her face. The message attached was brief. Ariel needs you. They shaved her head, all of it. She hasn't spoken in 2 days. I'm trying, but I don't know what to do. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. 20 years of military training had prepared her for many things, but not this. Not an attack on her child, on her most vulnerable spot. Within minutes, she was in her commanding officer's quarters, requesting emergency family leave. Within hours, she was on a transport plane headed home. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, her mind racing with questions, scenarios, and plans. Someone had touched her daughter. Someone had violated her child's dignity. Someone had exploited their power to humiliate a 12-year-old girl, and that someone would pay. As the plane soared across continents, Naomi made a silent promise to her daughter. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Daniels pulled into the school's visitor space. She hadn't been home long enough to change out of her uniform, nor did she want to. 20 hours of travel had left her exhausted, but adrenaline coursed through her veins, keeping fatigue at bay. "Remember what we talked about," Eric said from the passenger seat, his voice tight with concern. "These people aren't worth your career." Naomi checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting her cap with precision. Her eyes, usually warm brown, had hardened into something resolute and unyielding. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she replied, her voice measured. The calm in her tone was more frightening than any anger. "This isn't about my career. This is about our daughter." She'd spent the flight home reviewing her approach. As a lieutenant colonel who'd commanded hundreds of soldiers in high-pressure situations, Naomi knew that emotional outbursts rarely achieved objectives. Strategy, control, these were her weapons now. The school hallway fell silent as Naomi entered, her boots striking the tile floor with rhythmic purpose. Students pressed themselves against lockers, conversations dying mid-sentence. Teachers emerged from classrooms, curious about the sudden hush, only to step back when they saw her approaching. 2. Military uniform commanded respect. Naomi's expression demanded answers. A young teacher started to approach her, then thought better of it. A janitor nodded slightly as she passed, a gesture of subtle solidarity. Naomi didn't break stride, moving with the confident bearing of someone who knew exactly where she was going. The teacher's lounge door stood halfway open. Inside, several faculty members were gathered around a coffee pot, including a thin woman with graying blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. "Ms. Rourke," Naomi pushed, the door fully open. The conversation inside died instantly. Ms. Rourke turned, coffee cup halfway to her lips. Recognition flashed across her face, followed immediately by something Naomi recognized from her years in combat. Fear. Lieutenant Colonel Daniels, Ms. Rourke stammered, her cup trembling slightly. "I didn't realize you were back from deployment." "Clearly," Naomi replied, her voice arctic. She remained in the doorway, her presence filling the small room. "I understand you've met my daughter. Rather intimately, in fact." The other teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One by one, they found excuses to leave, squeezing past Naomi with averted eyes until only Ms. Rourke remained. "I was simply enforcing school policy," Ms. Rourke said, attempting to regain her composure. "Perhaps if you'd been more present in your daughter's life." "Don't," Naomi cut her off. "Don't pretend this is about dress codes or my deployment. We both know better." The air between them crackled with tension, laden with an unspoken history. "I don't know what you're implying," Ms. Rourke replied, but her voice had lost its conviction. 8 years ago," Naomi said quietly. "Fort Benning. Does that refresh your memory, Private Rourke? Or did you think I wouldn't recognize you?" Ms. Rourke's face drained of color. "You were in my training unit," Naomi continued. "Discharged after multiple infractions, and failing the basic qualifications. 3 times. That was different, Ms. Rourke whispered. You singled me out. You had it in for me from day one. Because you couldn't follow simple orders, Naomi replied, and because you filed false reports about your black colleagues. Sound familiar? Ms. Rourke set her cup down with shaking hands. You can't prove anything. Not then, not now. Naomi stepped closer. I don't need to prove it. I lived it, and now so has my daughter. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. This isn't over, Evelyn. Not by a long shot. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. If you ever come near my daughter again, you'll learn exactly why my unit called me the Hammer. As Naomi strode toward the principal's office, memories surfaced from her military past. Evelyn Rourke had been a problem from the first day of training, constantly undermining her black peers, claiming they received preferential treatment, filing complaints when she was corrected. After being discharged, she'd threatened to make them all pay someday. And now here she was, wielding power over children instead of adults. The realization made Naomi's blood boil, but she kept her expression neutral as she approached Principal Wexley's office. His secretary attempted to stop her. Do you have an appointment? Naomi didn't break stride. He'll see me. She opened Wexley's door without knocking. The principal looked up from his computer, irritation flashing across his face before recognition set in. Mrs. Daniels, he said, quickly standing. We weren't expecting Lieutenant Colonel Daniels, she corrected him. And you should have been expecting me the moment your teacher assaulted my daughter. Wexley gestured to a chair. Please sit. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Mr. Wexley. Naomi remained standing. I'm methodical. There's a difference. She placed a military folder on his desk. The label read, Incident Report. Daniels, A. Assault and battery, educational negligence, civil rights violation. What's this? Wexley asked, not touching the folder. This, Naomi said coldly, is what handling a situation looks like. My team has already compiled witness statements, medical documentation of Ariel's condition, and copies of all the permission forms we filed with your office last year. Wexley's confident demeanor faltered. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Ms. Rourke has been disciplined. A 1-day suspension is not discipline, Naomi interrupted. It's a vacation. She tapped the folder. Inside, you'll also find evidence that Ms. Rourke has a history of racially motivated incidents. This isn't her first time targeting a black child, though it may be her most brazen. Wexley's face darkened. These are serious allegations. They're documented facts, Naomi corrected, and they'll be submitted to the district board, the state education department, and if necessary, the media. You're threatening the reputation of this entire school over one incident? Wexley asked, his tone incredulous. You threatened my daughter's dignity, her mental health, and her right to education free from discrimination, Naomi replied evenly. I'd say we're still not quite even. Later that afternoon, Ms. Rourke sat in a small office at the local news station, adjusting her collar nervously as a producer clipped a microphone to her blouse. We'll be live in 3 minutes, the producer said. Just tell your side of the story like we discussed. Ms. Rourke nodded, practicing her most sympathetic expression in the monitor. When the red light came on, she transformed, her face a mask of wounded professionalism. Thank you for having me, she said to the anchor. It's important that people hear the truth. And what is the truth, Ms. Rourke? The anchor asked. I was simply doing my job, she replied, her voice quavering slightly for effect. The school had implemented a strict dress code policy, and as teachers, we're expected to enforce it. This student had been warned multiple times about her hair. The student's family claims she has a medical condition, the anchor noted. There was nothing in her file about hair exemptions, Ms. Rourke countered. And frankly, I think this is being blown out of proportion because her mother is in the military. She's trying to play hero by threatening the school, but where was she when her daughter needed guidance on following simple rules? The anchor's eyebrows rose at the personal attack, but before she could follow up, Ms. Rourke continued. I've Dedicated my life to teaching, 20 years in the classroom, and now my reputation is being destroyed because one parent doesn't think the rules apply to her child. Across town, Eric Daniels waited until nightfall to return to the school. The anonymous note about the nurse's files had been eating at him all day. Who had sent it? And what would he find? The janitor who'd nodded at Naomi earlier was waiting by the side entrance, keys in hand. Frank Williams, he introduced himself, voice low. My daughter had Ms. Rourke 3 years ago. Trust me, I know what that woman is capable of. Thank you for this, Eric said, shaking the man's hand. I don't want to get you in trouble. Frank shrugged. Some things matter more than a job. The nurse's office is down the hall, third door on the left. The files are in the cabinet marked medical alerts. Eric moved quickly through the darkened hallways, the beam of his flashlight bobbing ahead of him. The nurse's office was unlocked, as Frank had promised. He headed straight for the file cabinet. Took him 15 minutes of searching before he found it. A complaint form Ariel had submitted 2 weeks before the incident. In it, she described how Ms. Rourke had made repeated comments about her hair, calling it distracting and unprofessional. The form was signed and dated, but there was no indication it had ever been processed. Scrawled across the bottom in red ink were the words, "No action required." Eric photographed the document with his phone, his hands shaking with anger. They'd known. They'd had warning, and they'd done nothing. While Eric gathered evidence, Naomi sat at her home office desk, methodically filing formal complaints with every relevant authority: the State Board of Education, the Office for Civil Rights, the American Civil Liberties Union, the National Association of School Principals. Each complaint was meticulously documented, her military precision evident in every detail. When she finished, it was past midnight. She checked on Ariel, who had finally fallen asleep clutching her sketchbook, then rejoined Eric in the kitchen. Find anything? She asked, as he showed her the photos from the nurse's office. They knew Naomi, Eric said, his voice breaking with barely contained rage. Our baby tried to tell them, and they ignored her. Naomi studied the document, her expression hardening. Principal Wexley's signature is on this form. He personally declined to investigate. She looked up at Eric. They're going to regret that decision. The next morning, Principal Wexley called Mr. Reed into his office. The art teacher entered warily, noting the presence of the district's lawyer, Jason, effective immediately. You're being placed on administrative leave, Wexley announced without preamble. What? Mr. Reed stared in disbelief. On what grounds? Disrupting the educational environment, Wexley replied. Several parents have complained that you've been discussing the Daniels situation in class. That's not true, Mr. Reed protested. Students have questions. I've simply reminded them to be kind to their classmates during a difficult time. Your contract specifies that teachers will not introduce controversial topics in the classroom, the lawyer interjected. Your leave is paid, but we expect you to turn in your keys and clear out your desk by noon. Mr. Reed stood slowly, anger radiating from him. You know what happened to that child was wrong. Everyone in this building knows it. And this is how you respond? By silencing anyone who speaks up? That will be all, Mr. Reed, Wexley said dismissively. As news of Mr. Reed's forced leave spread through the school, Naomi prepared for her most public move yet. Dressed in her full uniform, medals gleaming under the studio lights, she sat across from a national morning news anchor. Lieutenant Colonel Daniels, thank you for joining us, the anchor began. Can you tell us what happened to your daughter? Naomi looked directly into the camera, her voice steady. My daughter, Ariel, has a medical condition called alopecia that causes hair loss. She wears extensions to protect her scalp and her privacy. Last week, a teacher at her school forcibly shaved her head, claiming it violated the dress code. The school has stated this was a miscommunication, the anchor noted. There was no miscommunication, Naomi replied firmly. There was deliberate cruelty and institutional cover-up. We had filed all the proper medical exemption forms. My daughter had submitted a complaint about this teacher's targeting behavior 2 weeks prior. The school ignored every warning sign. What do you hope will come from sharing your story? Naomi leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. Accountability, justice for my daughter, and change, so no child ever experiences this kind of violation again. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I've served this country for 20 years, protecting American values like dignity and equality. If the system won't protect my daughter, I will dismantle it myself and rebuild it better. The interview ended, but Naomi's words echoed across social media, igniting a firestorm that would soon engulf the entire school district. By nightfall, Naomi's interview had been viewed over 2 million times. Clips circulated on every social media platform, her final statement becoming a rallying cry for parents across the country. If the system won't protect my daughter, I will dismantle it myself. The family's phone rang constantly, news outlets requesting interviews, parents sharing similar stories, civil rights organizations offering support. Eric fielded the calls, carefully documenting each one, while Naomi focused on their legal strategy. But most importantly, they focused on Ariel. The girl remained withdrawn, speaking little and eating less. Her once vibrant sketches had turned dark and chaotic, pages filled with harsh lines and shadowy figures. Still, she clung to her art supplies like a lifeline, spending hours hunched over her sketchbook in silent concentration. By morning, a small group of protesters had gathered outside Lakeside Middle School, their numbers growing with each passing hour. Parents, former students, and community members held signs reading, "Justice for Ariel," and "Protect our children." Among them was Maya, accompanied by her mother and sister. When reporters approached, asking for interviews, Maya politely declined. "I'm just here for my friend," she told them. But her sister Jasmine was more vocal. "This isn't an isolated incident," Jasmine told a local reporter. "Ms. Rourke has been targeting students of color for years. Ask any alumni." Her words sparked a flood of social media posts from former students, each sharing their own experiences with the teacher. "She made me wash my face in front of the class because my makeup was too ethnic. She said my natural hair was unprofessional and would limit my career options. She told me my name was too difficult and called me Amy all year instead of Amara." The stories mounted, creating a damning pattern that could no longer be dismissed as misunderstanding or miscommunication. Inside the school, tension filled the hallways. Students whispered about Ariel, about Ms. Rourke, about the protesters outside. Teachers struggled to maintain focus, aware that every word could become part of the growing controversy. Late that evening, Naomi received an unexpected email from someone named Alex Baker, identified as the school's IT technician. "Mrs. Daniels," it read. "I've been following what happened to your daughter. There's something you should know. The full security video from the nurse's office exists, or at least it did. Principal Wexley ordered me to delete it from our servers the morning after the incident. I told him it was gone, but I might be able to recover it from our backup system. If you're interested, we can meet somewhere off school grounds." Naomi forwarded the email to their lawyer before responding with a meeting location. This could be exactly the evidence they needed, unedited, footage showing exactly what had happened to Ariel. But Alex never showed up. 2 days passed with no word. Naomi tried calling the number he'd provided, but it went straight to voicemail. She was considering filing a missing person report when her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Tell your hacker to stop digging or we'll bury him." A chill ran down her spine. She immediately forwarded the message to her military contacts in cybercrime, then called Eric. "They're threatening Alex," she said without preamble. "Whoever they are." "The school administration wouldn't go that far," Eric replied, uncertainty in his voice. "Maybe not Wexley," Naomi agreed. "But someone's pulling strings here. This is bigger than one teacher or one principal." While Naomi worked to uncover the truth and locate Alex, Ariel continued her silent recovery at home. She hadn't returned to school, couldn't face those hallways, those stairs. But she'd begun painting again. The first few canvases were dark, almost abstract, swirls of black and gray with jagged red lines cutting through. But on the fourth day, something changed. She began a new painting, a barren tree, its branches stretching across the canvas like beseeching arms. Most of the leaves had fallen, scattered around the trunk in shades of brown and gold, but in the corner, almost hidden, a tiny green sprout pushed through the soil. When Naomi saw it, she stood in the doorway of Ariel's room, tears silently streaming down her face. "It's beautiful, baby," she whispered. Ariel didn't respond verbally, but she offered her mother the first genuine eye contact since the incident, a brief, meaningful glance that said more than words could. As the Daniels family focused on healing, the media landscape erupted into predictable battle lines. Conservative outlets framed the story as overblown. Military mom uses Pentagon connections to target teacher. School discipline or political correctness? The Lakeside Middle School controversy. Lieutenant Colonel overreaches. Should military officers influence civilian education? In response, Naomi called a press conference on the front lawn of their home. Dressed in civilian clothes, a deliberate choice, she stood before a bank of microphones, her posture military straight despite her casual attire. "I've heard the accusations that I'm using my military position to intimidate the school," she began, her voice calm and measured. "Let me be clear. I am not here as Lieutenant Colonel Daniels. I am here as Ariel's mother." She methodically listed the evidence they'd gathered, the medical exemption forms, Ariel's ignored complaint, witness statements, the school's contradictory public statements. "These are not military tactics," she continued. "This is what any parent would do to protect their child. The difference is, my training has taught me to be thorough and strategic. If that makes certain people uncomfortable, perhaps they should examine why." She ended by addressing the families watching. "If your child has experienced similar treatment, don't stay silent. Contact us. There is power in our collective voice." The press conference was a masterclass in controlled messaging. No outbursts, no accusations without evidence. Just a mother, fighting for her daughter with every tool at her disposal. The following day, Superintendent Richard Palmer called his own press conference at the district headquarters. Flanked by the school board president and two stern-looking attorneys, he announced the formation of a special reform task force to review dress code policies and disciplinary procedures. "We take these allegations seriously," Palmer stated, not once mentioning Ariel by name. "While we conduct a thorough investigation, Ms. Rourke will remain on paid administrative leave." He then introduced a series of immediate reforms, including sensitivity training for all staff and a review of all dress code violations from the past 3 years. When reporters asked about the specific allegations of physical assault and the shaving incident, Palmer deflected. "We cannot comment on ongoing investigations or individual student matters due to privacy laws." Watching from home, Naomi scoffed. "Optics, not justice," she muttered to Eric. "They're hoping this task force buys them enough time for public interest to die down." "Maybe it's time to consider other options," Eric suggested hesitantly. "Private school, maybe. Somewhere Ariel can get a fresh start." Naomi turned to him, genuine surprise on her face. "You want to run?" "I want our daughter back," Eric replied, his voice cracking. "The girl who used to laugh, who used to talk, who didn't flinch every time someone walks past her room." "And what about the next girl?" Naomi challenged. "The next child who crosses Rourke or Wexley. If we run now, how many more will suffer?" "That's not fair," Eric said, anger rising in his voice. "Our first responsibility is to Ariel, not to some hypothetical future victim." "They're not hypothetical," Naomi insisted. "They're real, and they're waiting to see if someone will finally stand up and say, 'Enough.'" Their argument was interrupted by a notification on Naomi's phone. Maya had sent a message. "Found something. Coming over." 20 minutes later, Maya sat at the Daniels' kitchen table, her phone connected to their laptop. On the screen was a screenshot of a group text message between Ms. Rourke and another teacher, dated the morning of the incident. "I don't know if it helps," Maya said nervously, "but my friend's older sister teaches at Lakeside. She was in this group chat with Ms. Rourke and some others. She got kicked out after Ms. Rourke found out we're friends, but she saved some of the messages first." Naomi and Eric leaned closer to read the exchange. Ms. Rourke. That Daniels girl is testing my patience again, drawing in class instead of taking notes. Unknown. Teacher. The quiet one with the braids? She's one of our top students. Ms. Rourke. Don't be fooled. She's been giving me attitude for weeks. Unknown. Teacher. Maybe just let it go. Her mom's deployed. Dad's raising her alone. Ms. Rourke. No. I'm about to teach this brat a lesson she'll never forget. The timestamp showed. The message had been sent just 30 minutes before Ms. Rourke had confronted Ariel about her hair. This is premeditation, Naomi whispered, her legal training kicking in. She planned this. Can we use it? Eric asked. In court? Absolutely, Naomi confirmed. Maya, your friend's sister may need to testify. Is she willing? Maya nodded. She feels really bad about what happened. She said she should have reported Ms. Rourke a long time ago. Later that night, after Maya had gone home and Eric had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from weeks of stress, Naomi checked on Ariel one last time. To her surprise, the girl was still awake, sitting up in bed with her sketchbook. Can't sleep? Naomi asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Ariel shook her head, still not speaking, but she turned her sketchbook toward her mother. On the page was a drawing of two figures standing together, one tall in a uniform, one smaller with a perfectly round, bald head. Both were smiling. Naomi felt her throat tighten with emotion. That's beautiful, sweetheart, she managed to say. Is that us? Ariel nodded, then did something that broke Naomi's heart wide open. She spoke, just 5 words, barely above a whisper. But they changed everything. Don't let them win, Mom. Naomi gathered her daughter in her arms, holding her close as tears streamed down both their faces. I won't, baby, she promised fiercely. I won't. The law office of Grace Yamada occupied the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise, its reception area a study in understated elegance. Potted bamboo plants stood in the corners, and the walls featured black and white photographs of historic civil rights moments. Naomi sat beside Eric on a sleek leather sofa, her posture military straight despite her civilian clothes. Across from them, Grace reviewed the documents spread across her glass-topped coffee table. Medical records, school policies, witness statements, and screenshots of Ms. Rourke's damning text messages. At 42, Grace was one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. The daughter of Japanese-American internment camp survivors, she had dedicated her career to fighting institutional injustice. Her record of wins against school districts, police departments, and government agencies was legendary. You've done impressive work gathering evidence, Grace said, looking up from the papers. Most clients come to me with anger and little else. You've brought me a case. Military training, Naomi replied simply. Document everything. Grace nodded, then leaned forward. I want to be clear about what we're facing. School districts have deep pockets and deeper connections. They'll try to bury this under procedural delays and technical objections. Are you prepared for a long fight? We're prepared for whatever it takes, Eric answered firmly. Good. Grace gathered the papers into a neat stack. Because I'm not just filing a complaint. I'm filing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit naming the school district, Principal Wexley, and Ms. Rourke personally as defendants. Claims will include assault, negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil rights violations. She paused. This will get ugly. They'll attack your character, your parenting, even your military service. Naomi's expression didn't change. They can try. The following morning, as Grace's legal team prepared the paperwork, Ms. Rourke received an unexpected visitor at her small suburban home. The man who stood on her porch wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile practiced and reassuring. Ms. Rourke? I'm Lawrence Whitfield, he introduced himself. I'd like to discuss your legal options. Evelyn Rourke eyed him suspiciously through the crack in her door. I can't afford a private attorney. You won't need to, Whitfield replied smoothly. My services have already been arranged. May I come in? Inside, Whitfield explained that he represented one of the city's most prestigious law firms. A concerned party has retained us to ensure you receive the best possible defense, he said, placing his business card on her coffee table. What concerned party? Ms. Rourke asked, confused. Whitfield smiled. Let's just say there are people who recognize that this situation has broader implications than one teacher and one student. People who understand that traditional values and educational authority are at stake. Ms. Rourke's shoulders relaxed slightly. So they believe me? That I was just doing my job? Of course, Whitfield assured her. And we're going to make sure everyone else sees it that way too. What Ms. Rourke didn't know, couldn't know, was that Lawrence Whitfield's firm had received a substantial retainer from a foundation with direct ties to 3 members of the school board. The same board members who had established the Staff Protection Fund that had quietly buried other incidents over the years. By the end of the week, Grace Yamada had filed the lawsuit, and the court had granted an emergency hearing due to the nature of the claims involving a minor. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and protesters, their signs declaring support for Ariel, or in smaller numbers, defending teachers' rights. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Naomi arrived in her dress uniform, her medals catching the fluorescent light. Ms. Rourke sat beside Lawrence Whitfield, dressed in a modest navy dress that seemed calculated to project humility. Principal Wexley and the district's legal team occupied the table furthest from the Daniels family, a physical distance that matched their strategy, separation from Rourke's actions. Judge Eleanor Barnes, a stern woman in her 60s, with a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings, called the court to order. Before we begin, she announced, I want to remind everyone that while the public interest in this case is significant, this courtroom is not a media circus. We will proceed with dignity and respect. She turned to Grace. You may make your opening statement, Counselor. Grace approached the bench. Your Honor, this case is about abuse of power in its most naked form. A teacher, tasked with nurturing and protecting children, physically assaulted a 12-year-old girl. She forcibly shaved Ariel Daniels' head, knowing full well that Ariel had a medical condition, alopecia, that made her hair a matter of both physical and emotional health. She continued, outlining how the school had failed at every level. Ignoring medical documentation, dismissing Ariel's prior complaint, actively covering up evidence, and retaliating against staff who spoke out. When it was the defense's turn, Principal Wexley's attorney immediately tried to distance his client from Ms. Rourke's actions. Your Honor, while we acknowledge that an unfortunate incident occurred, Principal Wexley had no direct involvement. He runs a school of over 800 students and must trust his staff to handle disciplinary matters appropriately. When he learned what had happened, he took immediate action by suspending Ms. Rourke. Whitfield followed with Ms. Rourke's defense. My client was simply enforcing established school policy. She had no knowledge of any medical exemption, as that information was never properly communicated to her. This case represents a fundamental misunderstanding, not malice. Grace's expression remained neutral, but her eyes gleamed with anticipated victory. She had expected these exact arguments and had prepared to demolish them. The first witness she called was the school nurse, Patricia Adams. Ms. Adams, Grace began after the nurse was sworn in. Please tell the court what happened. When Ms. Rourke brought Ariel Daniels to your office, the nurse twisted her hands nervously. She said Ariel was violating the dress code with her hair. When Ariel mentioned her medical condition, Ms. Rourke said she had already checked the file and there was no exemption. And did you verify this information yourself? No, Nurse Adams admitted, her voice small with shame. I should have, but Ms. Rourke was insistent that she had parental permission. Did Ms. Rourke show you any written permission? No. Did she call Ariel's parents to confirm? No. Yet you provided the clippers that were used to shave Ariel's head? The nurse's eyes filled with tears. Yes. It's the biggest regret of my career. During cross-examination, Whitfield tried to shift blame to the nurse. Isn't it your responsibility, not Ms. Rourke's, to know which students have medical exemptions? Objection, Grace called. Counsel is attempting to deflect responsibility from his client. Sustained, Judge Barnes ruled. Mr. Whitfield, stay focused on your client's actions. As the day progressed, Grace methodically dismantled the defense's arguments. She produced emails showing Wexley had been notified within minutes of the incident and had advised Ms. Rourke to handle it quietly and avoid detailed documentation. Then came the moment that shifted the entire atmosphere of the courtroom. Alex, the IT technician who had disappeared after contacting Naomi, entered through a side door escorted by a court officer. He looked nervous, but determined as he took the stand. Mr. Baker, Grace began, can you tell the court about the security footage from the day of the incident? Alex nodded. Every area of the school is under video surveillance, including the hallways and the nurse's office. The system automatically saves footage for 30 days before overwriting. What happened to the footage from the day Ariel's head was shaved? Principal Wexley asked me to delete it, Alex stated clearly. He said it was a student privacy issue, but that's never been our protocol before. We preserve footage whenever there's an incident. Did you delete the footage as instructed? I told him I did, Alex replied, but I actually created a backup first. It didn't feel right. Grace approached the bench. Your Honor, we'd like to submit this recovered footage as evidence. The video was displayed on screens throughout the courtroom. The quality was grainy, the angle slightly off-center, but the content was unmistakable. Ariel sitting in the nurse's chair, tears streaming down her face as Ms. Rourke held the clippers to her head. The girl's mouth was moving, pleading, but there was no audio. It didn't matter. The visual told the story clearly enough. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. One juror visibly wiped away tears. During the lunch recess, Lawrence Whitfield cornered Ms. Rourke in a private conference room. This is not going well, he said bluntly. The video is damaging. You said you could handle this, Ms. Rourke hissed. You promised me they couldn't touch me. Whitfield's eyes narrowed. You never mentioned there was video, or that you had a personal history with the mother. He checked his watch. We need to change strategy. When we return, I want you to appear remorseful. Suggest that you were overwhelmed by work stress, that you exercised poor judgment in a moment of frustration. I did nothing wrong, Ms. Rourke insisted. That girl was deliberately provoking me with her attitude and those ridiculous braids. Whitfield stared at her for a long moment. With all due respect, Ms. Rourke, if that's your position, you're going to lose everything. Your job, your teaching, license, possibly your freedom if this turns into a criminal matter. But Ms. Rourke's arrogance had been nurtured too long to be easily dismissed. Years of getting away with smaller cruelties had convinced her of her own rightness, her own untouchability. In the afternoon session, the most difficult moment arrived. Ariel was called to testify. Recognizing the potential trauma, Judge Barnes had made special accommodations. Ariel would not have to face Ms. Rourke directly. A screen was placed between them, and Ariel was accompanied by a support counselor. She entered wearing a colorful head wrap, her face solemn but composed. As she took the oath, her voice was barely audible, but her resolve was evident in her straight spine and steady gaze. Ariel, Grace began gently, can you tell us what happened that day in your classroom? Ariel took a deep breath. I was drawing in my journal after finishing my math work. Ms. Rourke got angry. She said my hair was against the rules. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. I tried to tell her about my alopecia. I told her my mom had filed papers with the school. She wouldn't listen. What happened in the nurse's office? She told the nurse she had permission to cut my hair. She didn't. Then she took out the clippers. Ariel's voice wavered slightly. I begged her to stop. I kept saying, please call my dad, but she just kept going. She seemed happy about it. The courtroom was utterly silent as Ariel described the aftermath. The stares, the whispers, the nightmares, the silence that had overtaken her for days. Why didn't you speak? Grace asked. Because no one was listening anyway, Ariel answered simply. The raw truth of the statement seemed to hang in the air. Even the court reporter wiped away tears as Ariel stepped down. Judge Barnes called. For a 15-minute recess, her own composure visibly affected. When court resumed, it was Ms. Rourke's turn to testify. Lawrence Whitfield had clearly coached her to appear contrite, but under the pressure of cross-examination, her facade cracked. "Ms. Rourke," Grace pressed, "did you have any personal history with Lieutenant Colonel Daniels before this incident?" "Objection," Whitfield called. "Irrelevant." "Your Honor," Grace countered, "we have evidence that Ms. Rourke's actions were motivated by a personal vendetta against Ariel's mother. It goes directly to intent." "I'll allow it," Judge Barnes ruled. "The witness will answer." Ms. Rourke's face flushed. "We may have crossed paths. Isn't it true that Lieutenant Colonel Daniels was your superior officer during your brief military service, and that you were discharged after failing to meet basic requirements?" "She had it in for me," Ms. Rourke snapped, her composure evaporating. "Just like all of them do. These entitled parents and students who think they can weaponize identity to get special treatment. Rules apply to everyone." The courtroom fell silent at her outburst. Whitfield closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the damage done. Grace let the moment linger before asking her final question. "Ms. Rourke, did you target Ariel Daniels because of who her mother is?" Ms. Rourke's silence was answer enough. The day's final surprise came when Grace called an unexpected witness, Colonel James Stratton, Naomi's former commanding officer. The silver-haired veteran took the stand with military precision. After establishing his credentials, 30 years of service, multiple commendations, current position as a military ethics instructor, Grace got to the point. "Colonel Stratton, did you have occasion to observe Ms. Rourke during her military training?" "I did," he confirmed. "She was in Lieutenant Colonel Daniels' training unit 8 years ago. And what was your assessment of her performance?" "Below standard in every category," Colonel Stratton stated flatly. But more concerning was her attitude toward colleagues, particularly those of color. She filed multiple complaints alleging discriminatory treatment, all of which were investigated and found to be without merit. "Did she ever make comments about Lieutenant Colonel Daniels specifically?" "Yes." After her discharge, she told several unit members that people like Daniels would get what's coming to them eventually. "We flagged it in her exit report, but had no grounds for further action." The impact of this testimony was immediate. It transformed the narrative from an isolated incident into a calculated act of revenge, a teacher abusing her power over a child to settle a personal score with the child's mother. As the day's proceedings concluded, the jury members' expressions told the story. Several couldn't look at Ms. Rourke. Others kept glancing sympathetically toward Ariel and her parents. That evening, while the jury deliberated, someone leaked part of Ms. Rourke's deposition to the media, specifically her comment, "They should be grateful I didn't shave the whole school." The public backlash was swift and fierce. Social media exploded with outrage. Calls for Ms. Rourke's permanent banning from education flooded the school district's phones and email. Principal Wexley, seeing the writing on the wall, contacted the district's lawyers privately, exploring the possibility of a separate settlement. His priority had shifted from defending the school to saving his own career. Malik Dupree had been a journalist for 20 years, the last 7 specializing in education and local government. He'd covered school board meetings, budget crises, and teacher strikes, but nothing had captured his attention like the Daniels case. Something about it didn't add up. Why would a prestigious law firm like Whitfield's take on a public school teacher's defense? And why was the school board so determined to protect her? Malik began digging, requesting public records, talking to sources, following financial trails. 3 weeks into his investigation, he received an anonymous email containing encrypted files. The sender identified themselves only as concerned citizen. Inside was a gold mine, financial records showing the creation of a special fund by 3 school board members, James Patterson, Valerie Simmons, and Robert Walsh. The fund, officially labeled Professional Legal Support, had paid for the defense of 8 different staff members over the past decade, All cases involved allegations of misconduct against minority students. All had been quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. Ms. Rourke's legal fees were the latest expenditure from this fund. Malik's expose hit the front page on a Sunday morning. School Board Secrets, the hidden fund protecting problem teachers. The article detailed how the board members had created a system to shield employees from consequences, using taxpayer money to silence victims and bury evidence. By Monday, the story had gone national. Other journalists began investigating similar arrangements in districts across the country. What had started as one girl's trauma was revealing a pattern of institutional protection for those who abused their power. As public pressure mounted, other victims began to come forward. Jackson Reynolds, a biracial ninth grader who had been expelled the previous year for his distracting hairstyle. Emma Sanchez, a disabled student who had been denied accommodations and publicly humiliated by a teacher who was later defended by the same Staff Protection Fund. Naomi, recognizing the power of these collective stories, began organizing the families. Together they created a support network, sharing resources, legal advice, and emotional support. What had begun as one lawsuit was evolving into a movement. Mr. Reed, reinstated after public outcry over his unpaid leave, returned to Lakeside Middle School to find his classroom had been reassigned. Relegated to a small office in the administration wing, he was instructed to focus on curriculum development rather than teaching. Instead, he chose a different path. During his lunch break, he invited local reporters to join him outside the school. Standing on the sidewalk, public property where the administration couldn't stop him, he spoke his truth. "I failed Ariel Daniels," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew something was wrong, I saw the signs, but I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of making waves. I will carry that regret forever." He paused, gathering himself. "But I will not fail her, or any student, again. Not ever." By his side stood Eric and Naomi, with Ariel between them. The image of the four of them, unified in purpose despite their different races and backgrounds, became a powerful symbol of solidarity that circulated widely online. That afternoon, the school district made its move. Superintendent Palmer called, Naomi directly bypassing their attorneys. "Lieutenant Colonel Daniels," he began, his tone conciliatory. "The district would like to offer a settlement, $5 million, with full admission of wrongdoing by Ms. Rourke personally. And," Naomi prompted, knowing there was more. "And a non-disclosure agreement, of course. Standard procedure in cases like this." Naomi's laugh was cold. "You still don't get it, do you? This was never about money." $7 million then," Palmer countered, "plus a college fund for Ariel. But we need this resolved quickly and quietly." "You're not buying silence," Naomi told him, her voice steel. "You're buying my rage, and trust me, you can't afford it." She hung up without waiting for his response. While the legal battle continued, Ariel was finding her own path to healing. Her art had evolved, moving from dark, chaotic expressions of pain to more structured pieces that told stories of resilience and transformation. A local gallery owner, Danielle Foster, had seen Mr. Reed's press conference and reached out to the family. Would Ariel consider showing some of her work? The exhibition would be anonymous if she preferred, protecting her privacy while sharing her voice, Ariel agreed. The show, simply titled Stripped, featured 15 of her paintings arranged chronologically, telling the story of her trauma and gradual reclamation of self. The centerpiece was a striking image of a small, bald black girl standing amid burning school desks, her expression not of anger but of quiet determination. The exhibition opened on a Friday evening. By Saturday morning, every piece had sold. By Sunday, photos of Ariel's paintings had gone viral, resonating with people far beyond their city. Orders for prints flooded in, along with messages of support from around the world. For the first time since the incident, Ariel felt something close to pride. Her pain, transformed through art, was touching others, helping them find words for their own experiences. As public support for the Daniels family grew, so did the opposition's desperation. One morning, Naomi found an envelope in their mailbox, containing a single sheet of paper. The typed message read, "Back off or you'll regret the bench." Eric wanted to take it to the police immediately. "This is a clear threat," he insisted, but Naomi studied the wording, her brow furrowed. "Regret the bench. That's specific. Too specific to be random." She set the letter aside. "No police yet. This is a clue, not just a threat. Someone's telling us to look at the bench, the school board, maybe the judges. There's something there we're missing." Her intuition proved correct when, days later, Alex contacted them again. The IT technician had been monitoring the school's security system remotely and had made a startling discovery. "I hacked the boardroom feed," he admitted when they met at a coffee shop miles from the school. "I know it's not strictly legal, but after they threatened me, I figured turnabout was fair play." He showed them footage from a recent emergency board meeting. The 3 board members named in Malik's article, Patterson, Simmons, and Walsh, remained in the room after others had left, apparently unaware that the recording system was still active. "They're laughing about you," Alex said, turning up the volume. "Listen," Patterson's voice came through clearly. "How long do you think the Daniels woman will last? Another week? 2? "My money's on her backing down after the settlement offer," Simmons replied. "Military types understand the chain of command. Once the superintendent steps in, she'll fall in line." Walsh chuckled. "And if not, there's always the bench option. Judge Ford owes me after that zoning exception for his lake house." The implications were clear. The board members were planning to use their influence with the judge if the case proceeded. Naomi immediately forwarded the footage to Grace and Malik, along with the threatening note. The following day, Malik published a follow-up piece with the headline, "Board Corruption Exposed, Secret Recording Reveals Plan to Influence Judge." He carefully avoided mentioning Alex as the source, protecting the whistleblower while exposing the conspiracy. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protesters gathered outside the district offices, demanding the board members' resignations. The state education board announced an emergency investigation into corruption allegations. Within 48 hours, Patterson, Simmons, and Walsh had resigned, citing personal reasons and health concerns. Their departures created vacancies that would require special elections, elections that several parents from the newly formed advocacy group were already planning to contest. As the institutional framework supporting Ms. Rourke crumbled, her past began catching up with her. A live stream featuring a young woman named Tasha Williams went viral overnight. In it, Tasha described an incident from 5 years earlier at a different school district. "I was 14, she recounted, her voice steady despite the painful memory. "Ms. Rourke was my English teacher. She said my braids were unprofessional and would limit my career options. When I argued, she took scissors from her desk and cut one of my braids off, right in front of everyone." Tasha had reported the incident, but her complaints had been dismissed as exaggerated. Now, with Ariel's case making headlines, she felt empowered to speak out again. "I thought I was the only one," she concluded. "I want Ariel to know she's not alone either." Other former students began sharing similar stories. Not all involved physical actions, but all revealed a pattern of targeting students of color for their appearance, speech, or cultural expressions. The mounting evidence transformed public perception. Ms. Rourke was no longer seen as a strict teacher who had made one mistake. She was exposed as a serial abuser who had finally been caught. Throughout the tumult, Ariel had remained reluctant to return to Lakeside. The memories were too raw, the hallways too haunted. But one afternoon, she asked her parents if she could visit Mr. Reed's classroom. "Are you sure?" Eric asked gently. Ariel nodded. "I need to say thank you." They arranged the visit during after-school hours when the building would be nearly empty. As they walked the familiar corridors, Ariel's grip on Naomi's hand tightened, but she kept moving forward. Mr. Reed was waiting in his classroom, not the administrative office he'd been assigned, but his original art room. He'd temporarily reclaimed the space for this meeting. "Ariel," he greeted her warmly, "I have something to show you." He led her to the back wall, which had been transformed since she'd last seen it, where student artwork had once been displayed. Randomly, now a careful arrangement of prints hung in a perfect grid, reproductions of Ariel's paintings from the stripped exhibition. In the center was a simple statement: "Art speaks when words fail. Listen." Ariel stared at the display, emotions washing over her face in waves. Then, for the first time since that terrible day in the nurse's office, she smiled. A genuine smile that reached her eyes and momentarily erased the shadows there. It wasn't full healing. That would take much longer. But it was a spark of the old Ariel, the girl who existed before trauma had rewritten her story. A beginning, a possibility. A promise that while they couldn't erase what had happened, they could create something new from the ashes. Rain pattered against the courthouse windows, casting shifting shadows across the worn wooden benches. After 6 weeks of testimony, evidence, and legal arguments, the trial was drawing to a close. The courtroom was filled to capacity, with journalists and spectators lined up since dawn to secure seats for the final day. Ariel sat between her parents, her head now covered with a colorful wrap that had become her signature style. In the die. Weeks since her art exhibition, she'd begun experimenting with different head coverings, reclaiming her appearance on her own terms. Today's wrap featured an intricate pattern of blues and golds, colors of strength and resilience. Grace Yamada rose for her closing argument, her dark suit crisp, her posture confident. She moved to stand directly before the jury, making eye contact with each member before beginning. When Ariel Daniels walked into Lakeside Middle School on February 15th, she was a child entrusted to the care of adults who were supposed to protect her, Grace began, her voice clear and measured. By lunchtime, she had been assaulted, humiliated, and irreparably traumatized by one of those very adults. She paced slowly, allowing her words to settle. Throughout this trial, the defense has asked you to focus on policies, on procedures, on the chain of command. They've tried to shift blame from Ms. Rourke to the nurse, from Principal Wexley to the system. They've talked about dress codes and authority and respect for rules. Grace paused, then turned to glance at Ariel before facing the jury again. But this case has never been about dress codes or policies. It has been about one thing: the deliberate abuse of power against a 12-year-old child. Her voice hardened slightly. Ms. Rourke didn't simply enforce a rule that day. She enacted revenge against the daughter of a woman she resented. She used her position to inflict maximum humiliation on a child with a medical condition. She moved closer to the jury box. We've shown you the evidence. The medical documentation that Ms. Rourke ignored, the complaint that Principal Wexley buried, the text messages proving premeditation, the security footage capturing the assault, and the testimony of multiple witnesses who paint a consistent picture of targeted cruelty. Grace's expression softened. Most powerfully, you heard from Ariel herself. You saw her courage as she relived the most traumatic day of her young life. You heard how she lost her voice, literally, for days afterward. How her art became her only safe form of expression. How she still struggles with nightmares and anxiety. She allowed a moment of silence before continuing. The defense would have you believe that what happened to Ariel was a misunderstanding, a momentary lapse in judgment. The evidence tells a different story. It tells of calculated malice, institutional cover-up, and a child who will carry the scars of this experience for the rest of her life. Grace returned to her table, picking up a print of one of Ariel's paintings, the bald girl standing amid burning desks. Ariel titled this piece, "What Remains." It speaks to what was taken from her, but also to what could not be taken: her dignity, her creativity, her voice. Today, I ask you to give her something else that cannot be taken: justice. She carefully placed the print back on the table. When you deliberate, I ask you to consider one simple question. In a society that claims to protect its most vulnerable members, what message will your verdict send to every child who walks through a school door, trusting the adults inside to keep them safe? Grace returned to her seat beside Naomi, who reached over to squeeze her hand briefly, a rare display of emotion from the lieutenant colonel. Lawrence Whitfield rose next, his expensive suit and polished demeanor a stark contrast to Ms. Rourke's increasingly disheveled appearance as the trial had progressed. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this is indeed a case about trust, but not in the way Ms. Yamada has framed it. It's about the trust we place in our educators to maintain order and discipline in our schools." He moved to stand before the jury, hands clasped behind his back. Was Ms. Rourke's approach perfect that day? No. She would be the first to admit that her actions were heavy-handed. But consider the environment in which our teachers operate today. Underfunded, overcrowded classrooms where authority is constantly challenged and rules are treated as mere suggestions. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably, their expressions skeptical. The plaintiffs have painted an emotional picture of deliberate cruelty, but emotion should not overshadow the facts. And the facts show a teacher attempting to enforce established rules, who believed she had proper authorization, and who had no knowledge of any medical exemption. The district's attorney followed with his closing statement, similarly attempting to distance the school administration from Ms. Rourke's actions, while expressing deep regret for the miscommunication that occurred. When the attorneys had finished, Judge Barnes turned to address the jury. "You have heard all evidence and arguments in this case. You will now retire to deliberate and reach a verdict on each count. Take all the time you need to carefully consider the evidence presented." As the jury filed out, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Naomi reached for Eric's hand on one side and Ariel's on the other, forming an unbroken chain of family strength. "What happens now?" Ariel whispered, speaking more than she had in weeks. "We wait," Eric replied gently. "And whatever happens, we face it together." The waiting was excruciating. Hours stretched into the afternoon with no word from the jury. Court officers brought sandwiches and water for the Daniels family, who refused to leave the building. Grace used the time to prepare for various outcomes, though her confidence in the case remained strong. Outside, the rain continued, veiling the city in a soft gray mist. Protesters huddled under umbrellas, their signs wilting, but their resolve undiminished. News vans lined the street, reporters doing live updates beneath temporary canopies. As the courthouse clock struck 4, the bailiff entered the courtroom with a note. Judge Barnes read it silently, then announced, "The jury has reached a verdict. Please bring them in." A current of anticipation surged through the room as the 12 jurors filed back to their seats. Their expressions were solemn, giving no hint of their decision. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Barnes asked the forewoman, a middle-aged black woman with silver-streaked hair. "We have, Your Honor," she replied, handing a document to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Judge Barnes reviewed the paperwork, her expression revealing nothing. She returned the document to the bailiff, who passed it back to the forewoman. "In the matter of Daniels versus Lakeside School District, Evelyn Rourke and Thomas Wexley, on the count of assault and battery against the minor plaintiff Ariel Daniels, how do you find?" The forewoman stood. "We find the defendant, Evelyn Rourke, liable." Naomi's grip tightened on Ariel's hand. "On the count of negligence against defendants Lakeside School District and Thomas Wexley, how do you find?" "We find both defendants liable." "On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress against all defendants, how do you find?" "We find all defendants liable." "On the count of civil rights violations against all defendants, how do you find?" "We find all defendants liable." A wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Naomi remained stoic, but Eric's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Ariel let out a small, barely audible sigh of relief. "And has the jury determined damages?" Judge Barnes continued. "We have, Your Honor," the forewoman confirmed. "We award compensatory damages in the amount of $2 million for medical expenses, future therapy, and educational accommodations." She paused, then continued with renewed conviction. "We further award punitive damages in the amount of $5 million against the district, $1 million against Principal Wexley personally, and $2 million against Ms. Rourke personally. The total, $10 million, caused an audible gasp in the courtroom. It was one of the largest awards ever granted in a school misconduct case in the state. "The jury is thanked and dismissed," Judge Barnes declared. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. Judgment is hereby entered according to the jury's verdict. As the courtroom erupted in murmurs and movement, Ms. Rourke sat frozen, her face drained of color. Principal Wexley stared blankly ahead, his career effectively over. The district's attorneys were already on their phones, undoubtedly calling the superintendent with the devastating news. Grace turned to the Daniels family, her professional demeanor giving way to genuine emotion. "Congratulations," she said simply, gathering her papers. "Justice was served today." "Thank you," Naomi replied, her military bearing finally softening. "For everything." As the courtroom began to clear, a man in a dark suit approached their table. He flashed a badge briefly. "Detective Michael Sullivan, Special Victims Unit. Ms. Rourke, I need you to come with me." Ms. Rourke looked up in confusion. "What? Why?" "We're reopening 2 previous complaints against you from former students," Sullivan explained, his voice matter-of-fact. "In light of today's verdict and new witness statements, the DA has authorized charges of aggravated assault and child endangerment." Lawrence Whitfield stood quickly. "My client isn't going anywhere without proper. It's all proper." Sullivan cut him off, producing a warrant. "Either she comes voluntarily, or she's cuffed in front of all these cameras. Her choice." Ms. Rourke rose shakily, her arrogance finally shattered by the reality of handcuffs and criminal charges. As Sullivan escorted her toward the side exit, avoiding the media frenzy out front, she glanced back once at Ariel. For a moment, their eyes met across the courtroom. Ariel didn't look away. She didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't show any emotion at all. She simply held the gaze steadily until Ms. Rourke turned away, shoulders slumped in defeat. It was, in its way, the most powerful moment of the entire trial. The child standing tall while the adult who had tormented her was led away to face consequences. Outside, rain had given way to watery sunshine. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing as the Daniels family emerged. Naomi stepped to the microphones that had been hastily assembled. Today's verdict sends a clear message. No child should ever face abuse at the hands of those entrusted with their care. No institution should prioritize its reputation over a student's well-being. Her voice carried across the crowd. This case was never about money. It was about accountability and about ensuring that what happened to Ariel never happens to another child. As if on cue, Governor Eleanor Richards was holding her own press conference across town. "I have directed my office to draft legislation that will establish clear protocols for handling sensitive medical situations in schools," the governor announced. "The Ariel Protection Act will ensure that no child's medical privacy or dignity is violated by untrained or unauthorized personnel." The governor's support transformed a personal victory into a policy revolution. Within days, legislators from both parties were scrambling to co-sponsor the bill, recognizing both its moral necessity and its political value. Meanwhile, other dominoes continued to fall. Principal Wexley, facing professional disgrace and personal financial liability, submitted his resignation effective immediately. The school board, still reeling from the corruption scandal, accepted it without comment. The announcement of his replacement came as a surprise to everyone except those who had been following the case closely. Jason Reed, the art teacher who had stood by Ariel even at risk to his own career, was named interim principal with a mandate to rebuild trust and create a more inclusive educational environment. In the days following the verdict, Naomi found herself fielding an unexpected type of call, political ones. Party representatives, advocacy groups, even a senator's chief of staff reached out, all with the same message. Her poise, intelligence, and commitment to justice would make her an excellent candidate for office. "They're talking about a state Senate run," she told Eric one evening as they sat on their back porch, watching Ariel sketch in the garden. "They say I could write my own ticket after the case's publicity. Are you considering it?" Eric asked, studying his wife's expression. Naomi watched her daughter for a long moment before answering. "No, there's more important work to do right here." She gestured toward Ariel. "Politics can wait. Healing can't." Instead, Naomi began laying the groundwork for a foundation to help other children who had experienced school-based trauma. The Settlement money would provide initial funding, but the vision was much larger: a nationwide network of resources, legal support, and therapeutic programs. 2 weeks after the verdict, Ariel stood before a small crowd at a local community center art exhibition. Her voice was quiet but steady as she spoke into the microphone. "I've been asked if I forgive Ms. Rourke," she said, addressing the question many had wondered but few had dared to ask directly. "The truth is, I forgive her. But I won't forget." The simplicity and maturity of her statement moved many to tears. This child who had endured so much was refusing to let bitterness define her, while also refusing to pretend the harm had never occurred. That evening, the Daniels family stood together on the courthouse steps where they had received the verdict. The building was closed now, the steps empty except for them. Ariel stood between her parents, looking up at the imposing facade that had once seemed so intimidating. Naomi leaned down to whisper in her daughter's ear, "You were always stronger than any of us, baby." Ariel reached for her parents' hands, drawing strength from their presence while standing firmly on her own 2 feet. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more healing, more growth. But in this moment, they stood united. A family that had faced the worst and emerged not just intact, but stronger. Justice had been served. Not perfect justice. No verdict could erase what had happened, but enough to begin the process of making things right. Enough to ensure that Ariel's suffering would prevent others from experiencing the same fate. Enough to transform a personal tragedy into a catalyst for systemic change. As they walked away from the courthouse for the final time, Ariel looked back once, then forward again. The past was acknowledged. The future awaited. The sun streamed through the windows of the converted warehouse, casting golden light across the busy art studio. A dozen children sat at tables, paintbrushes in hand, expressions ranging from intense concentration to unfettered joy. At the front of the room, Ariel Daniels, now 13, demonstrated brush techniques on a large canvas. "Remember," she said, her voice confident in a way that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "There's no wrong way to tell your story. Your art belongs to you." The sign above the door read, "The Stripped Project, Art Therapy for School Trauma Survivors." What had begun as Ariel's personal healing journey had blossomed into a thriving nonprofit, funded initially by her art sales and the settlement money, now sustained by grants and donations from across the country. Each Saturday, children who had experienced bullying, discrimination, or other school-based trauma gathered to create art in a safe space. Some came with physical scars, others with invisible ones. All found acceptance and understanding within these walls. Naomi watched, from the doorway, pride evident in her expression. The past year had been a journey of healing for their entire family, but especially for Ariel. The nightmares had gradually subsided. The silence had given way to words, then to laughter. The wounded child was still there, but alongside her had emerged a young advocate with surprising strength. "Mrs. Daniels," a volunteer approached with a tablet. "Maya's podcast just went live. I thought you might want to listen." Naomi took the tablet, pressing play on the audio file. Maya Thompson's voice filled her earbuds, confident and passionate despite her youth. "Welcome to Unbraided, the podcast where we talk about the real experiences of girls of color in today's schools. I'm your host, Maya Thompson, and today I'm joined by my very first guest and my best friend, Ariel Daniels." What followed was a thoughtful conversation between the two young women about resilience, expression, and the power of speaking truth. Maya had discovered her voice as an advocate after witnessing what happened to Ariel, channeling her initial guilt and anger into productive action. The podcast had already gained a significant following among teens and parents alike, creating a platform for voices that had previously gone unheard. Listening to the girls speak so articulately about complex issues, Naomi marveled at their maturity, and at how trauma, while never desirable, could sometimes forge unexpected strength. Across town, Lakeside Middle School had undergone its own transformation. Under Principal Jason Reed's leadership, the culture had shifted dramatically. The oppressive dress code had been replaced with reasonable, medically inclusive guidelines developed with student and parent input. Teacher training now included extensive sections on cultural sensitivity and medical accommodations. The art room, Mr. Reed's former domain, had been expanded and renamed the Expression Space. Its walls featured diverse artwork from students past and present, celebrating individuality rather than enforcing conformity. That morning, Mr. Reed stood before the school board, presenting the results of the first year under the new policies. Attendance was up. Disciplinary incidents were down. Parent satisfaction had increased by 60%. The lessons we learned were painful but necessary, he concluded, adjusting his signature bow tie. We're building a school where every student feels seen, heard, and valued, where differences are celebrated, not punished, where education isn't just about tests, but about growth as human beings. The board members, all new following the corruption scandal, nodded their approval. Among them sat two parents who had been active in the protests following Ariel's case. The systemic change they had demanded was slowly becoming reality. Meanwhile, at the Veterans Affairs office downtown, Eric Daniels led a support group for military parents navigating school issues for their children. Drawing from his own experience, he had developed a program specifically addressing the challenges faced by military families, frequent relocations, deployments, and the complex emotional needs of children adjusting to new environments. The system isn't designed for us, he told the group of parents, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes. But that doesn't mean we can't change the system. Our children deserve advocates who understand their unique situations. The group had become a vital resource, providing everything from legal advice to emotional support. Eric had discovered a gift for connecting with struggling parents, his calm demeanor and hard-won wisdom creating a safe space for sharing fears and frustrations. In a downtown courtroom, Ms. Rourke's criminal case had finally concluded. The evidence from Ariel's civil trial, combined with testimony from other former students, had resulted in a guilty plea to reduced charges. The judge had sentenced her to 2 years, suspended after 6 months, with mandatory therapy and community service. Most significantly, she was permanently banned from working in education in any capacity. As Ms. Rourke began serving her sentence, the state legislature was voting on the final version of the Ariel Protection Act. The comprehensive legislation established clear protocols for handling medical situations in schools, created oversight mechanisms to prevent abuse, and implemented whistleblower protections for staff who reported misconduct. The day the bill passed, Naomi received a call from the White House. The president wanted to recognize her advocacy work with a Civilian Medal of Honor, celebrating her contribution to educational reform and child protection. The ceremony was held on a bright spring morning in the Rose Garden. Naomi, dressed in her formal military uniform, stood tall as the medal was placed around her neck. Beside her stood Eric and Ariel, both beaming with pride. Lieutenant Colonel Daniels exemplifies the best of American courage, the president said. When faced with injustice, she did not simply seek redress for her own family. She created a movement that will protect countless children for generations to come. Naomi's acceptance speech was brief but powerful. This honor belongs not to me but to my daughter Ariel, whose courage in the face of cruelty inspired a nation, and to every child who has ever felt unsafe in a place where they should be protected. We see you, we hear you, and we will continue fighting for you. Back home after the ceremony, life resumed its new normal. The Daniels family had found their rhythm again, different from before, but solid in its own way. Naomi continued her military career while devoting her spare time to the foundation. Eric expanded his veteran support network. Ariel divided her time between school, art, and advocacy work, gradually reclaiming the joyful spirit that had been temporarily dimmed. One morning, the Smithsonian American History Museum contacted the family with an unusual request. They were creating an exhibit called Voices of Resistance, documenting grassroots movements that had changed American policy. Would Ariel consider donating her original sketchbook, the one that contained her drawings from before, during, and after the incident? After careful consideration, Ariel agreed. The sketchbook was part of history now, not just her personal history, but a chapter in the ongoing story of civil rights and educational reform. On the day of the exhibition opening, Ariel stood before the display case containing her sketchbook. The curator had opened it to the final page, where she had written in careful letters, "You tried to erase me, but I redrew myself." Visitors paused to read the words, many visibly moved by their simple eloquence. None recognized the slender girl, with the colorful head wrap, who stood among them, witnessing the impact of her journey on strangers. A few weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Ariel woke to birds singing outside her window. Sunshine filtered through her curtains, painting patterns on her bedroom floor. For the first time in many months, she had slept through the night without dreams of falling hair or mocking laughter. She stretched, running her hand over her scalp, still mostly bald by choice now. After experimenting with wigs and wraps, she had discovered a surprising comfort in sometimes simply being as she was. Her head was no longer a source of shame or trauma, but simply another canvas for self-expression, sometimes decorated, sometimes bare, always hers to define. Her walls, once covered with dark, chaotic sketches, now displayed bright, bold paintings, full of movement and life, not erasing the past but building upon it, not forgetting, but transforming. Sometimes justice doesn't come in one big strike. It grows from the courage of one small girl who refused to stay silent. It builds through the persistence of parents who would not be dismissed. It spreads through the conscience of witnesses who choose to stand up rather than stand by. It transforms through art that turns pain into power, and sometimes it changes the world. What would you have done if someone tried to strip away your child's dignity? Would you have fought the system as fiercely as Naomi, or looked for an easier path? If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share to help more people discover what happens when we stand up against injustice.